Okay, well, so it's a real pleasure to welcome you today to this seminar. So this is part of the VMSG, which is the Volcanic and Magmatic Studies Group of the Geological Societies. It's one of the working groups of the Geological Society. It's one of our 60th anniversary celebratory lectures. So we're celebrating 60 years of VMSG this year, which is really great. And there's a public seminar at universities across the UK, one per month for the year. So this is really exciting that Cambridge gets to host one here. And I'm going to apologise now for the really long title that I wrote in a dark corner like 6 months ago and then got hellbound to it. So today's seminar is on how can social sciences be used to explore how communities think and feel about volcanic risk and how to better inform disaster risk management. So this is co-hosted by the Centre for the Study of Existential Risk, which is where I work as a senior researcher, and the Cambridge Volcanology Group, and of course VMSG. So it's a real pleasure to be doing this with you today. The seminar is going to be recorded, so just note that if you're going to be asking questions or anything. And the recordings are going to be posted up onto the VMSG YouTube page pretty promptly afterwards, hopefully. We aren't live streaming, just an FYI. So just very quickly for the students in the room and to kind of give you a bit more insight into VMSG. So VMSG is like a kind of organisation. There's no formal membership, but we come together once a year for our kind of UK. It has always traditionally been kind of UK and Ireland based, but actually we're becoming much more global, which is really great. And we have an annual conference each year. So the next one is being hosted in Dublin, and it's a joint conference with I forget what the group is called, the mineral group, mineral deposits. Is it mining deposits? Something like this. It's a joint seminar, and so this is a really great opportunity if you're a student working in volcanology to come and share your research with the kind of broader volcanology community. And we do lots of events for students on preparing for PhD interviews, preparing for just kind of general socialising and networking. There's all sorts of events that you can kind of join that we do throughout the year. Also to say that we have a whole bunch of student bursaries that we're able to support travel and research, and up to around £500 that you can apply for. And the next deadline is 15th of September, and that's for next year. So if you were thinking about going to something like IAVC next year, then, or the EGU, for example, you could apply in September for your funding towards going to that. We also have a whole bunch of awards and prizes you can be nominated or self-nominate for. So we've got the postdoctoral keynote, which is a self-nominate and be nominated for. We have the Willie Aspinall Award, the Henry Amelius Fieldwork Grant as well, so that's particularly if you're working in Arctic and cold climate. And then we have the Thermo Fisher Award, which Clive Oppenheimer won last year. So that one actually, you can nominate your supervisors, which is really great. It's like a kind of distinguished career kind of award. So just to kind of give you a little bit overview of where we are. So, to the main event, and I'm just really, just the pleasure to be able to organise a seminar and invite you, probably your two favourite researchers, to come and speak is kind of a guilty pleasure. So it's my real pleasure to have Dr. Blaise Mafuko Nyandwi with us from the University of Goma in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and he'll be sharing some of his research from his PhD working in Goma in the DRC, and some of the work that we're currently doing here in Cambridge. And then, of course, we've got the wonderful Professor Amy Donovan, who needs really no introduction. And so Amy's going to be sharing lots of her research that she's been doing throughout her career across the Caribbean, across North Korea, and now into her Imagine project in South America. So really excited to have both with us today to share their experiences. So without further ado, I'll pass over to Blaise. So, pass the microphone. Sorry, I've got too many things on. It's not gone well. Okay, let's put that.
Yes, so thank you for having me here. So today I'm going to talk to you about people who are living next to an active volcano, especially in Central Africa. So when volcano erupts, this is not working. We can have a specular picture, for example, to see, but it represents really a huge danger for people who are living near these volcanoes. So why there are several reasons why people they are living next to a volcano, and most of this reason is just because of the fertilized soil coming from the volcano. So we have now people really who are living near these volcanoes. And when we look at the history, for example, here we had, when you read the literature, volcanologists, they say this was a minor eruption, but that had a huge impact because it killed more than 23,000 people. And even though at that time, for example, there were even a map, a hazard map, so it was like people, they knew where it is the high-risk zone and so on. So we can try to, it was not even because of the monitoring issues, maybe it was related to the risk communication, or maybe the community was not prepared. But we still also having like good example, successful evacuation of more than 2,000 people. So the volcanic risk mitigation is also related to how people they can consider the risk and how they can make decision when the volcano erupts. So it's why, yes, volcano activities related to the internal activity of the health, and we are not really, it's not like, for example, flood that we can prevent, but yes, we can prevent that a volcano can erupt, but we can try to do something. It's not like what said the president from Turkish, that when they had earthquakes, saying that disaster is something that is related to the destiny plan, so we just be there, and then this is something that can happen. We can try to do something, and we can try to work with community to improve the way that disaster mitigate, and try also to understand how we can improve the disaster risk reduction. So if you look at the risk equation, you can see that, yeah, we have several elements, but one of these, in case of volcanic risk for the hazard, we can prevent it, like it's not like flood, but we can try to reduce the vulnerability, the exposure, and to improve the resilience. And these three components rely also on the capacity of the community that we are facing. So it's why social sciences is really also important to have some insight so that we can improve the risk mitigation. And this volcanic risk mitigation needs to be done both at the institutional level, but also at the individual level. So it's why it is really important to understand how people, they consider the risk and how they can make decisions. So, yeah, the region that I'm going to present, this is from the Central Africa. I know that most of you are familiar from this map. So the red triangle represent a volcano. And this is a region where we have active volcanism and high population exposure, but where we have also very densely populated city. So if we try to have an idea about this region, so we are in the east of Congo, between the Lake Kivu, and it's just near Rwanda, the country called Rwanda. And when we zoom in again, you can see now here the city of Goma here. And also this is a national park called Virunga, and here is the active volcano called Nyiragongo and Nyamuragira. And then we're still having other volcanoes here, but that are not really, for this moment, active. So the city is located between the Lake Kivu and also the volcanoes. And when we zoom again, you can see how the volcanic setting of the region. So we have here volcanic cones, and this is the volcano, and this is the city of Goma. So we are like here for the south we have the Lake Kivu. This side we have the the Virunga National Park. The other side is Rwanda, and the places that remain is toward the volcano. And we're still having also a lot of fissures where lava flow sometimes come. For example, for the three volcanic historical eruption, they were coming from these fissures. So how was Goma when we had the first historical eruption? So here I presented the boundary of the actual urban area is here in, but this is the area where we had the urban area in 1977 when we had the first historical eruption, and the lava flow stopped close to the city, but there were people living there because it was like a small villages. And after that, in 2002, we had the major historical eruption that the lava flow crossed the city and it destroyed around 30% of the city, and even the lava flow reached the lake. But what you can realize, what you can see here, is also the expansion of the city. And recently, in 2021, you can see how the city became very large, and also we had another eruption in 2002 and impacted the surrounding area, but this now people are living there even though administratively is not part of Goma. So here we have now a map of the three historical eruption, and then you can see this is the major eruption in 2002, and something which is really particular for the Virunga volcano. So they are open volcanoes, so we're still having a permanent lava lake, so that so when we have an eruption, this can disappear, but after that it can appear again. And you see that this is really a region that is very highly populated. Now, Goma, we are reaching 2 million people if we take account also displaced people coming from the region. So this is an idea of what looks like the city center. And then you can see that is really very nice built, because we have is a humanitarian hub, and also we have a lot of UN agencies and also mining operator and a regional trade. But when you look at the other neighborhoods, you're still having small houses. So it's like a city where we have really a contrast between neighborhoods. And the other particular situation of Goma is that around the city we're still having people who came from the villages because of wars. And here I presented just some data, recent data on 6th of May, so like 2 days before. We had now in Goma more than 1,500,000 people displaced. And you can see that here we're still having, from February 2023 to April 2024, how this number of the population displaced people are increasing, and they are living close to surrounding Goma. So this is a bit of the context and the setting of the city of Goma. So I started my PhD research just before an eruption. It was not something that was planned, but I was really lucky, because this is really something which is not possible, for example, to organize a PhD and then you are planning to have an eruption. So I evaluated the risk perception of the population before the eruption, and then because this can help people to understand how these people, they can make the decision when it comes to organize the evacuation, and how, for example, we can try to understand the recovery. So I wanted first to introduce you to what exactly is risk perception. So the risk perception is a mental process that involves three processes: collecting, selecting, and interpreting signals that come from a natural event. And it can be a natural event or even a technological event. And this signal, they can be related to a direct observation, like, for example, someone who is witnessing a lava flow, or coming from other sources of information. And these processes of collecting, selecting, and interpreting, they are filtered by factors that can be demographic, psychological, or spatial distribution of the population. And these factors induce differences in the way people perceive the risk. So at the end, this can also induce differences in the way people, they can respond to the risk. So it is really important to understand how these people perceive the risk so that we can develop risk mitigation strategies. This is based on what we know, how people, for example, they consider the risk and how they can decide to implement protective measures. So now, the risk perception, it can be assessed through a qualitative approach, but also a quantitative approach. For me, I used a qualitative approach, asking people, for example, how they evaluate the likelihood of the hazard, how they perceive the severity of impact on the city, and also how, for example, they were evaluating the likelihood of being personally impacted. So now you can aggregate these factors to get the level of risk perception. So here we have a graph that represents the proportion of the population depending on how they were perceiving the risk. So in red, we have people, the proportion of the population that they were perceiving the risk to be high or very high, and the blue is very low and low. And you can see here, before the eruption, the level of risk perception was very high. So this means that maybe we could expect people who can consider the risk, so it means that they are living in a risk area and they know that they are going to face the risk. So maybe we could expect that people could maybe make good decisions when they are going to face the eruption. But yeah, another thing, another measure results that we got is that there is also a differences in the way people perceive the risk depending on where they are living. So in the background here on this map, you have the stability map of the lava flow stability map. So you can see both here in the east, even also in the west, we're still having a high level of stability. So it means that when we can have an eruption, so it means here where we have the red color, it means the level is very high. So it's still having the possibility to have lava flow even in the west. But if you look at the level of risk perception, for example, here in this neighborhood, is where we have the high level of risk perception is just because the three historical eruptions, they occur in the east. So it means that people, they are considering that the next eruption is going to have the same path, the lava flow going to have the same direction like the historical eruption. And this is really a big issue because people are living in the West. They could consider themselves to not be vulnerable to volcanic eruption. So let's see then now how after the eruption people decided to evacuate. So the eruption occurred, it was on Saturday evening. I remember that day, I was even not in Goma, I was in Belgium, and then it was after a busy week, and then I called my wife, and then I told her, I'm going to switch off my telephone, and then I want to have a day off. I wanted to relax. And then in the evening, it was around 6, I was coming back, and then when I switched on my telephone, and then I got a lot of notification, and then just when I was seeing pictures, they told me, we have an eruption. My supervisor also, they were calling me because we have to work that day to understand what was going on. And this eruption occurred without precursor or sun. So it means that even the observatory, they were not aware that we are going to have an eruption. So people, they just saw in the evening a red glow. And then when you look at this graph, it shows it's come from the interviews that we had with people. It means that they just saw a red glow erupting, the volcano erupting, and some of them, they were in the house. This is what means this. They were in the house, and then others, they were outside, and then they started evacuating. This has come from the interviews. So when you look at the proportion then of people who decided to evacuate or not, here we have the proportion of the population that evacuated here in blue, and here we have people who decided to not evacuate. And then you can see in the west neighborhood is where we still have we had a major population of people who decided to not evacuate. So it means that depending on what they had before the eruption, because at that moment there were no instruction and no idea where exactly the lava flow is coming from. So we were expecting maybe the whole city going to evacuate, but people who decided to evacuate, most of these people, they were in the east neighborhood. So few days after the eruption, here I'm just presenting main results. So few days after the eruption, in Goma, there were several earthquakes. So it means like after 30 minutes, there were earthquakes. And this was just because there were an intrusion of magma under the city. So the observatory, in collaboration with the local authorities, they decided to order a second evacuation. And then you can see how people, they get the information from this. They got the information from the radio, the social media, and some of them, they had this information coming from their neighbors, and they started moving. So you can see here, people were trying to cross the recent lava flow after six days. So why? Because they wanted to go, for example, to their villages where they can have support, because they were really suspicious that maybe the evacuation is not going to be very well organized by the government. So, yeah, you can still see here that people who decided to not evacuate. So, yeah, something that I need also to mention here, that during the second evacuation, it was not mandatory for the whole city. It was only in the east where the intrusion was located. But there's still people who decided to not evacuate. You can see here, even the proportion is very high. Why people decided to not evacuate, even though there were a lot of earthquake and it was an order from the government so that they can evacuate. So it's just because there were reasons, for example, that pushed them to not evacuate. So we try also to understand in a social approach to understand what are the push factors. So push factors are related to the zone where people evacuated, and then that can push them to come back early, because when we have an evacuation, people need to stay where they were. And then you can see some of them, they claim that they were poor shelter organization, they feel not free where they were living, and also the problem of well-being and lack of resources. But there were also pull factor that pertain to the city of Goma that were pulling people to come back. Some of them, they say that they wanted to come back to protect their home because there are people who stay in Goma, and also there were thieves and so on. And they said that they wanted to reduce the losses because they evacuated using their own money and resources, but they had the information from people who stay in Goma that their homes, they were being, they were thieves and so on, so they decided to go back. But some of them, they were saying that really they are attached to the city of Goma. There were also other reasons that push people really to not evacuate. It's just because they were evaluating the risk, and they said staying, it was maybe safe than evacuating. And some of them, they said they don't have resources to evacuate. And this, in terms of resources, we mean information and also the money. So to really mitigate the volcanic risk in Goma or in the global south from everywhere, it's not just giving the information and giving order. We need also to improve the way we manage the risk. So what we learned from this is that, people, they were aware that they are living in a risk zone, but they need more resources for mitigation. And here, again, resources don't just mean term of money, but also the information. And the knowledge of the natural processes, it was very limited, what we had. And also the experience created a common knowledge resulting in an idea that, the next coming eruption, they are going to happen only in the east. So what we are doing now is to understand these people that were impacted by the lava flow, by the eruption, how they are trying to recover from this disaster. So here you can see this is the project that we are working with the support of Cambridge Africa. So you can see this is few months after the eruption. So the eruption will happen in May. So like few months after, you can see the lava flow. But few days after, 2 years after, the lava flow was full of homes. You can see here these people. And then we now trying to understand why these people move there. And then this is a satellite imagery from Google Earth. We can get it every time, but people started moving there 3 months after the eruption. So the situation of Goma is that we're still having conflict around Goma, and Goma is the better place where people, they can live in safe and have every facility. So here you can see, for example, in July 2022, here is a school. And then just 1 year after, you can see what happened around. I don't know if you are seeing this. These are small homes for displaced people. So these are the situations that push people really to come in Goma. And when they have this opportunity, they can't leave the city because they don't have any place where to go. And then here you can see how they are building their small house and to live on these lava flows. You can see here they tried even also to search where they can have soil, and they are having, for example, a small garden for vegetables and so on. So this is not really what we can say has resilience, but they are trying to survive. So this is what we are now doing as research with the support of Cambridge Africa. Thank you.
So we'll do a joint question and answer session at the end.
Okay.
We can kind of,
Sorry.
Okay, thank you, Lara. So I'm going to present a kind of a much broader talk and based on some of the work that I've done over the last more than 10 years, but mainly the most recent stuff. And this has involved lots and lots of people, some of whom are named there, but not all of them. And particularly the work that I'm doing in Latin America at the moment is really being done by Julie Morin and Rory Walsh, who has recently left us, in collaboration with a lot of people from that part of the world. So I'll talk a little bit more about that later on. I want to start kind of broadly and talk about doing social science around volcanology and within kind of between physical and social volcanology. Then I want to think a bit about the questions that come out of that for how we work with communities. So how do we engage with communities as scientists, and particularly as scientists from the global north, so working in countries where there may have been a colonial history and all of these kinds of things. And then I just want to come back to this really broad, really obvious question that I have been asked by journalists, so it's, a valid question, obviously. What is a volcano and how other people see volcanoes? So one of the things that has been really obvious to me over the years is that, well, we go to a volcano, we look at it and we think physical processes or we think risk. A lot of the people who live on volcanoes really, really don't. They think lots of different things. So I'm going to give 3 different views, 2 of which are kind of snapshotty. The first one is from Montserrat and some Christians that I interviewed back in 2012 and haven't published yet. And then a view from the Korean Peninsula, and then some of the stuff from Latin America more recently, which is Latin America is represented in both of those photos in Licancabore in the north, and then in a rather guilty-looking Villarrica in the south. So I've worked in sort of physical science of volcanology, and I've used some of the instruments at the top of that set of photos, and been involved in monitoring volcanoes. So this one in the middle from Holuhraun in Iceland in 2014, and sort of thinking about how the scientific knowledge that we generate through petrology or through gas chemistry is used more practically in helping nodal agencies. So nodal agencies are those agencies that are responsible for managing volcanic risk, for mitigating volcanic hazards and informing populations. They always have slightly different levels of responsibility. So some of them issue alerts specifically about the hazard. Others have much more responsibility around the risk, about setting alert levels, things like that. And those are the kind of things that are put on them by the state. And I've worked a lot with communities and with people trying to sort of reach communities, getting frustrated with communities as well. And so thinking about what are the challenges in managing that interface between science and society effectively, whether that's policymakers or communities that are at risk. And then how we do that in an ethical way. One of the things was really clear, certainly in the UK during COVID, was that scientists can have a huge amount of power. We can be in a position where we're advising government, and government are at least claiming to be acting on the basis of our advice. And that gives us a lot of power over society. We may not feel powerful at all. We may feel very, very uncertain and very, very frightened by that power, but that is still a form, something that we have to think about when we're trying to approach communities around volcanoes. And one thing I'm just going to mention quickly here is Mount Pektu, because I'm not going to show another photo of it, but it's the volcano on the bottom, the crater lake, and the China-North Korea border runs sort of there-ish. So this photo is taken from the Korean side. And I'm going to talk a little bit about
the challenges around when you're monitoring a volcano that actually has multiple communities and multiple different ways of thinking around it. But first I want to talk a little bit about why we need interdisciplinary volcanology. We need people who are trained in both social and physical science. Because volcanoes are generative, they generate land, so they produce new land, that's what they do, that's their function in a way. They're the way the Earth cools down and produces new continental crust, and that's a very spectacular process. We also learn a lot during eruptions. Scientists like eruptions, as Blaise has said, in a way that we learn things. We learn new things. We see new phenomena, but we also learn new things about how populations interact. And this is a quote that I love from the 17th century after the subplinian eruption of Vesuvius in 1631. It's been possible to know in such fresh ways. This kind of idea that you encounter these phenomena and, as Deleuze, who's a French philosopher, says, something in the world forces us to think. This something is an object not of recognition, but of a fundamental encounter. A sort of an inspiration, in a way, that we learn in new ways from the phenomena that we are observing. And that is as much, that's a process that is also emotional. It's not just a process that is cognitive. And volcanoes are also, as Blaise has shown us, generative of communities. They produce resources that people want, so they live near them. There are also increasingly, in large parts of the world, people going to live by volcanoes because they like the lifestyle, the kind of mountain lifestyle, or the, going canoeing on the rivers that come down the volcanoes, all of these kinds of things that we've encountered in the work that we've been doing in Latin America. And people also have life worlds around volcanoes, so worldviews, things that ways in the West we find sometimes quite challenging to understand because we're very used to this in post-Enlightenment kind of separation of nature and culture, but many societies do not separate those two things. The volcanoes are part of their society, they're part of their community in some way, and we'll come on to that later on. Science itself is a part of culture, and the more you talk to these communities, the more it helps you to understand where science fits with all of these things as well. And science is done in different ways in different places, different kinds of knowledge are prioritised and resourced differently in different places. So science is a part of culture, engages with other kinds of knowledge, and when it has to do that very abruptly in a crisis, that's when we get into problems where people don't respond well because it's a different way of knowing to what they're used to. So people have these kind of complex relationships with volcanoes that are not just about risk. Risk is something that emerges out of the history of sort of modernist science in the West. It is not necessarily something that people associate with the volcano that they've never seen erupt, for example. It's not universal in the sense that it's not universally understood. And as Blaise has shown us, it's not universally perceived, certainly. So this is a quotation from Sheila Jasanoff, who's a sociologist of science, that science progresses by looking both outside and in. And these efforts include not only attempts to understand the objects that impinge on our existence, so nature, in the case of volcanoes, the sort of outside, the things that we're studying, but also to query and improve the methods by which we investigate them. And I think this is quite an interesting insight into how we go about thinking about how we navigate this science policy interface that we find so challenging, or the science-society interface, is also thinking about how science can better approach that interface and understand the people on the other side of it as well. And I've already talked a little bit about power being important. Scientists have power. There's also an increasing amount of discussion within geology around the history of geology, the challenges associated with the history of geology. This is certainly something that we have encountered working in Chile, where there's an awful lot of mining, and there is a long history of exploitation of resources. That means that communities are actually really suspicious of geologists. So it's been quite useful to be able to say that we're geographers, which is unusual. Normally I go the other way, but when I'm with volcanologists, I'm a volcanologist or a geologist, but when I'm with geographers or with Chileans, I'm a geographer. And that's because there's a history there that means that there's a distrust. Geology has a long association with colonial powers that have exploited these places and sometimes continue to exploit those places, and that can be quite challenging to work with, and we have to acknowledge that even though our own values don't align with that. So we have to think about who we're working with as well, because if we're working global north to global south, for example, there's also a challenge with creating equitable partnerships. And there can be a challenge also with things like sampling. If you're sampling somewhere that is sacred land to somebody, that can be really problematic, and you have to negotiate that really carefully. In the social sciences, this gets even more complicated because you're taking data from humans, so you are interviewing people, and you have to think very carefully about the assumptions that you bring to that, what your background is bringing to that process, what kinds of ways you're interpreting what they're saying, which may not be the same thing as what they mean. And you have to get things like informed consent and make sure that they understand that what's going on and what the process is. And so there's quite a complex difference between the physical sciences and the social sciences in terms of how they approach the production of knowledge. And that is one of the reasons why, in order to do ethical interdisciplinary work, you need training in the discipline that you're working in. And if you don't have it, you need to collaborate with somebody who does. And that's something that I think is really, really important. The other thing that I think is really important is reciprocity. What are the communities actually getting from the work that we do? Are we just writing papers? And this is something that I've been very bad at various points in my career, and I'm trying to get better at. And I think also we need to acknowledge those sorts of learning experiences on the road that help us to understand these kinds of things. So this is my first example. This is from Montserrat, which I'm incredibly fond of because I did my PhD there. This is an old photo of the volcano. But these are just some of the things that some of the Christians I interviewed told me. So I interviewed pastors, quite a few pastors, and then a load of people who went to church. And I did a survey with some of the churchgoers as well. And I've sort of contextualized it with this quote that I'm very fond of from Ulrich Beck, which says, "Risk makes its appearance on the world stage when God leaves it." And I think that's quite an interesting insight into the sort of different ways of thinking that different cultures have. You could argue that if you believe in God, you don't experience the sort of existential ontological risks, but you do experience epistemic risks because you don't know what's going to happen, so you're worried about that, but you do know certain things like you believe about the security that you have in the sort of more ontological sense, in the sort of sense of being. So there's a kind of pattern to these. So you're seeing creation happen in front of you. You see the wonder of the pyroclastic flows and the lava at night. And then the whole geophysical aspects, this is creation in action. Unfortunately or unfortunately, those things have adverse effects on people, but I do believe that life was meant to be difficult. Not that it should be oppressive, but I think if we had life smooth, we'd never reach our human potential. And that's sort of talking to the biblical ideas around refinement by fire, or this sort of, that life is challenging, but we become better through that. And that was a theme that came out through quite a number of these interviews. It's important to note, of course, that the people who are still on Montserrat are the ones that stayed. So there is, in no way is this going to be a balanced sample. It's not intended to be a balanced sample. Social science often looks much more for meaning than it does for truth. So it's important that we sort of get the stories of different groups of people. I did also talk to them about trusting in the science and how it related to their faith, because obviously that's a question that we often ask, or we see asked in this country. And this is just one quote. "I'm no scientist, I listen to them, I believe what they say, but I don't want to die either, so I trust them. But my greater trust is in God," that you can trust in both of those two things. There were one or two people who said things like, "Well, I would have trusted them more if they'd gone to church more. And if I'd felt that my values were shared by them," was the kind of message behind that. I wasn't sure. And it wasn't that they weren't shared necessarily, it was just that I wasn't sure when it started. So there's some quite interesting ways of sort of interpreting this in line with the way that they think about themselves and their own philosophy worldview. Secondly, very different context. It's Pektusan, which is that volcano with the big lake that you can see in the background of this photo. Pektusan is on the border between China and North Korea. It's represented by the star in this map. which is showing where the resistance groups are said to have gone out, sent out by Kim Il-sung from the volcano, which is a sacred mountain, against the Japanese oppressors in 1945. And so the volcano has this huge significance to DPRK, so North Korea, because it's the sacred mountain of the revolution, whence Kim Il-sung led the rebellion against the Japanese oppressors. Prior to that, though, it was the sacred mountain on the Korean peninsula, which is represented in this quote. Emotionally and spiritually, most of Koreans understand it belongs to their spiritual land. So South Koreans also see it as part of their land. And they know the mythical story about their ancestors coming down from heaven to the lake. So people from Korea are supposed to have come from the volcano, essentially. And before COVID and so on, there were a lot of South Korean tourists going to the volcano through China, because that was how they could get to it. So this photo at the bottom that shows you this sign that says, "Protect geological relics and cherish the geological lands." This from the geopark on the Chinese side. There's a really big geopark on the Chinese side, Changbaishan it's called in Chinese. And on the north side as well, it's on the south side, but North Korean side, they are also doing more and more with tourism, but they also make pilgrimages to the mountain when they are sort of what we would say in the UK confirmation age, or would have said, and then as elderly people as well. So there is a significant cultural significance to this mountain. You see it behind the newsreaders, you see it behind the big statues. It's got this huge meaning that is nothing to do with the fact that it's a volcano. And this weird little figure at the top is there mostly because it took a lot of hours of my life. It's also out of date, but it shows different interpretations of the stratigraphy by different authors from different countries, largely. And it's one of the challenges when you've got a volcano that crosses the border is that you don't have the entire kind of geological history to go on either. So even when you are taking a scientific approach, you have different interpretations of the things that you see. Okay, and now I'm going to talk about Imagine, which is my kind of current ERC-funded project. A lot of the work that I'm going to talk about in the next few slides was largely done by these three characters, so Julie Morat, Rory Walsh, and Liz Gallant, who was a postdoc who was with us for a year during COVID. She had the worst possible experience in Cambridge from March 2020 to March 2021 or so, and is now in Hawaii, which is far better, I think. Imagine is working in a number of different sites in Latin America. I'm going to talk literally just about the northern part of Patagonia today, but we are also working in various other places as well. And Imagine has been sort of set up to look at the intersection between hazard and vulnerability, the things that fall in between hazard and vulnerability. And one of the most interesting or the sort of most exciting to me of those is value systems and the different value systems that science has versus potentially the communities that are engaging with science and engaging with volcanoes. And what we've tried to do in this project is to try to go into the communities and not impose our notion of what risk is, our notion of what a volcano is, but actually just find out what their concerns are around the environment in which they live. And we framed the project around environmental change in volcanic areas, so it is broader than just volcanic hazard. And there are a number of interesting political challenges in each of these locations that are different. Many of the indigenous communities that we're working with are working in this kind of area of tension between their own worldviews and what they have to do to satisfy sort of logics that are imposed on them by the government, particularly around making sure that their land is useful, for example. So they have to try and make money out of it in some way because capitalism says that's what you should do with your land. Otherwise, it's at risk of being taken away and used for mining and things like that. So there's a certain amount of kind of tension between these different attitudes and ideas around the land. So the process that we used in this research is really to talk. First thing we did was talk to the nodal agencies in the country. So talk to the Geological Survey of Chile, Senahumin, Albaro, and others. And we talked to Sejemar as well. So Seba is head of the observatory in Argentina. And also later on we talked to people in Inter and so on. So trying to find out what their concerns were about how volcanic risk is understood by communities and what they wanted us to do in these places, where they wanted us to work in Chile, because they've got like 90 volcanoes. Project wouldn't stretch quite that far, so we wanted to find out where the priorities were in terms of where to work. And then talking to the communities about their interpretations and their priorities. And then we went and developed, with the help of Martin Lucas-Smith, who's the computer officer in geography, a resource that we can then give them back as something that they can use within their communities, and I'll talk about that at the end. It's Volcano Voices, and that's its logo on the screen. And I should just say the photo at the bottom is of OBDAS, the Volcano Observatory in the Southern Andes, which is received huge amounts of funding after Chaiten erupted in 2008. They went from monitoring 8 volcanoes to monitoring, now they monitor 45, but they were monitoring like 43 by 2013. It was a huge expansion of volcano monitoring because of the Chaiten eruption. Still don't have enough people because everybody who's a geologist wants to go into mining and earn money. Okay, so this is the area I'm going to just talk about today. This is in northern Patagonia, the area around Jaima, Lonquimay volcano and Soyupuy volcano. These are 3 really interesting volcanoes because they have very different characters and very different histories. And I'm going to talk about 3 of the 4 communities, so Melipeuco, Malacajuelo, and Villapuena on the Argentinian side, and just give you some very quick anecdotes and ideas from the differences between those communities, even within Chile, and then as you move across the border to Argentina in terms of how they see the risk. They're all mixed communities, so there are Mapuche people who live in these communities and around these communities, but there's also a lot of people who've moved either from Santiago or from other parts of Chile who have summer houses there sometimes, or who live there on tourist activities, so there's quite a wide range of people. This is the eruptive history of these volcanoes. So in black you've got Jaima, erupts quite a lot, small magnitude mainly eruptions. Lonquimay erupts occasionally, the green ones, and this is from the Global Volcanism Database. And then Soyupuy just has this one quite large magnitude eruption, so this is a sort of VI 4, 3, 2, 1, a very long time ago, and we'll come back to that. First of all, I'm going to talk about Malacajuelo. And Malacajuelo is between Lonquimay and Jaima. They're much more aware of Lonquimay than they are of Jaima, because it's the one that they can see from the town more easily. And there hasn't been a lot of outreach in Malacajuelo, so there's relatively little volcanic awareness compared to Melipeuco, where people are much more kind of clued up to this, partly because there's a big geopark that I'll talk about in a minute, and also because there's been much more outreach done by OBDAS in Melipeuco than there has been in Malacajuelo. And this is one of the kind of more Mapuche views of the area, that no hill is alone, nor is the water that comes out alone. It has its owner, you have to ask his permission and greet him. If you go to the high mountain range, you have to salute it, because they are very sacred land. And this is really important in understanding how the Mapuche people relate to the volcanoes, that the volcanoes are spiritual beings. They have to be respected, and they have to be treated in particular ways. So the Cotracora Geopark, it actually covers most of this whole area and more. It's a huge enterprise, and the Mapuche are collaborating with that partly as a way to protect their land, because it stops development happening in these areas to a large extent, but it does also bring in a lot of tourists. They have these phenomenal sites like this stratigraphic profile that's just phenomenal, it's beautiful. They're developing lots and lots of different kinds of activities in that area. But the people in Melipeuco have relatively little awareness of this thing, which is Soyupuy. And Soyupuy is basically a massive caldera that's filled with ice. So it's glaciated. It's one of the few glaciated volcanoes in this part of Chile. And this is modelling that Liz did to show whether lahars would go, and Melipeuco is unsurprisingly at very high risk of lahars, as are some of the towns on the Argentinian side of the volcano. So it's got this huge hazard risk. It's probably less likely to erupt based on the eruptive history, but people are very unaware of it. It doesn't look like a volcano either, really, when you look at it from Melipeuco, and that's also really important. And we'll come on to that a little bit with Villapuenía as well, which is even less aware of Soyipulli than Melipeuco is. And this is a quotation that just talks about the role of the volcano in the sort of society as a form of weather forecasting device prior to the presence of meteorologists. So the kinds of ways that people have learned from their environment and relate to their environment and anthropomorphize their environment. Villapuenía, on the other side of the border, is interesting in that the Mapuche views are very similar in lots of ways. They have they say the same kinds of things. The border is much less of an issue in lots of respects. I mean, Mapuche have been there since before the border was there. And you kind of notice that in the sorts of things that they say. But there are very substantial social differences and political differences between Argentina and Chile. Chile is much better resourced. People in Argentina have much less awareness of volcanoes in general, even though they have been impacted quite severely and more severely than Chile by recent eruptions. In this region, at least, they prioritise volcanoes that are actually quite a long way away, but physically inside their country. So Copahue is a long way north, or relatively far north from Villapuenía, but it was the one that they mentioned much more than they mentioned Jaima or Soyipulli. So the border has this kind of cognitive effect on people. In Argentina, there's a lot more activism because people really don't trust the state to help them. That's kind of a pattern that we've observed in lots of different places. And Argentina, of course, is also economically in quite a lot of trouble at the moment, so that doesn't help, but it means that people mobilise, grassroots organisations mobilise. There was also an awful lot of concern about climate change on the Argentine side in particular. There is in the Chilean side as well in different ways. And this is a quote that I particularly liked from one of the Mapuche respondents who said, "We have to accept that we have certain limits. I can't think about exploding or erupting when we're not taking care of our common home, the Wal Mapu, or the Mapu Nuke, or the Nuke Mapu, which is the earth." And that's all there is to it, that we have to take care of the earth and the other things flow from that. And it's a different way of looking at the processes, flips the sorts of understanding that we have around, because they feel that, you care for the whole environment, you don't care for bits of it or worry about bits of it. So there's slightly these sorts of differences of ways of thinking when you talk to people and have longer conversations with people about these things. You start to sort of understand a little bit more of completely alternative universes for living in around volcanoes. Very quickly want to talk about the tool that we've developed, and this is sort of, I'm going to use the example of Chaitén for that. So Chaitén is this town in southern Patagonia. The volcano is just up there. You can see the little degassing dome up there. So it's straight down the valley that lahars came in 2008 and destroyed a large part of the town. This is all new land here. You can see it's been created in the 2008 eruption. The town was evacuated by boat because that's the sort of easiest way to get people out of there. But the Chilean government then decided that it wanted to build them a new town around the coast, around here, because it would be safer and protected from the volcano. This makes perfect sense from a kind of purely managerial perspective. But the community of Chaitén then engaged with a 4-year battle with the government because they wanted to move back to Chaitén, because this was their place, it's their home, they're attached to it. They have their community there, that's where they associate home with. And so eventually the government basically allowed them to move back, and they've moved back and rebuilt on the lahar deposits in this area. So one of the things we're asking a lot of questions about is how does that kind of attachment to community and space work around when you've actually seen, it kind of blows out of the water the idea that you experience a hazard and it completely freaks you out because they've gone back. And the thing is still having some seismic activity and stuff. So there's been a lot of work done on it. And this is Julie using the Volcano Voices map that she drew, which is way better than anything I would produce. And what we did with Volcano Voices was essentially just say to people, which are the parts of this area that are really important to you? What do they mean to you? Can you tell us some stories about them? And then once we'd got some, we started putting them on the map. And then we could get people to point to them if they were stuck or if they wanted to, where is it? And they told us some stories. And this is just an aside, the other painting. I love this. It's from Loretto's house. So she's the lady who's actually holding up the map, but you can't see her. And she was working at the museo where we're going to deploy this tool, hopefully. And these are the two Mapuche legend snakes. So this is Chai Chai, the water snake, and Tren Tren is the fire snake. And people talked a lot about snakes moving under the ground when the volcano was active. And this is just a little example of the prototype version of Volcano Voices. And there are lots of people who've been involved in helping with this, particularly Martin. So it's just a map like Google Maps. It's not particularly innovative technology, but it lets us do what we wanted to do with it, and it gives people an opportunity to explore these places. And so this is audio. It's in Spanish, so I've given the text for this. It's talking about the importance of Lanín to the people in Argentina, in Neuquén province particularly, and also the sort of arrangements they have in place to manage the volcanic risk. And then we have other buttons. All of these things show you something. So the next one is going to show you just links to some of the scientific information in Chile. We can also put photos. We also have drone footage and things like that we've put in. This is one of the Mapuche interviewees around Lanín, who talks about this sort of project around Pian Mahuida, which is this sort of the spirit that lives in Bate Mahuida. And explains a little bit about the problems of tourists going up into Lanín. Mapuche who says you can't invade a place. If you pollute the water, it's wrong. If you start going up Lanín all the time for the challenges and for the experience, you're doing damage. So it's not that we say Mapuche, that it belongs to the Mapuches, but we've got to respect it. We've got to care for the volcano. And there is an interesting ongoing debate around that in the region. We've also got the link to the Observatorio Argentino, on this particular shot, and there's lots of other kinds of things. And the reason for doing that is to have all of these things on the same page. So we've got scientific information, we can put hazard maps in, but we've also got stories and oral histories. And we're putting them all together so that people can see all of that stuff together and start trying to think about how we might bridge some of these kinds of different ways of thinking. And people do want scientific information. Coming from the Mapuche communities and some of the communities in the north, they want to know the science, they want to understand their environment. And some of the communities where we're working with this technology want to use it to provide guides for tour operators and so on about the science, as well as about the indigenous histories of the region. So we've got lots of different uses that it's being put to. And I'm going on way too long. So this is it's my summary slide. But the volcanoes do have many lives and are part of many lives. It's really important to build equal partnerships, to listen to other people, to accept that we don't know anything quite a lot of the time, and to talk about that, and be aware of the values that we bring and how they might not be the same as the values of the people that live in these places. But the beauty of it is that the difference helps you to understand yourself better and the science that you're doing better, and understand the context in which you're working a lot better, and it improves the science. So, and I'll leave you with this quote from a guy in Via Poenia, which I really like. So, thank you.
Cheers. Thank you to both our speakers. They were really good talks. As a numericist myself, I don't often get the chance to explore the social side of volcanology, so I think it's something that's actually really important to do. Just quickly before we get on to the Q&A, I thought I'd introduce who I am, where I'm from. My name is Jack. I'm one of the conveners for the Cambridge Volcanology group. We've recently relaunched, but we're really keen to get as many people involved as possible. So our key aims really, we're across the Department of Geography and Earth Science, and our aim is to bring together as many people as possible who are interested or actively researching anything to do with volcanoes, magmatism, remote sensing, everything in between, really. You've got a little cutout on your benches with some useful links about where to find out more about us. And if you haven't got access to one of those pieces of paper, you can just give it a quick Google, Cambridge Volcanology Group. Everything that we do will be on there. So, without further ado, I have some questions, but I was wondering if anyone else has the burning desire to ask the questions first. Just thinking logistically with the microphones. Someone could maybe do the legwork. Thanks. So, does anyone have any questions for Blaise or Amy?
Get my steps in.
This is for Blaise. In your kind of pre-eruption survey in Goma, and you might just know this from having lived there and spent time there, what was like the current state of education and kind of risk education, and what were the kind of agencies or organizations that were doing volcano education? Like what was the current state?
In Goma, even in Congo, the level of education is, according to what diploma people have as diplomas, is high, because we have a lot of people who are doing university level, because it's like a country that if you don't study, you can't have another job. So people, they try to do everything that is possible that they can have a job. But even though the opportunity to have jobs is really difficult. So, but also on the other hand, the problem of comparing the level of education is also really difficult, because it depends on countries. You can have a diploma, but maybe the knowledge that you have maybe is not really on the same level of the diploma that you have. So also, before the eruptions, we still have in Goma a lot of NGOs and UN agencies, because this is not related to the volcanic crisis, but because of the conflict context that started 30 years ago after the Rwanda's genocide. So they're still there for now, a long period, And then we don't know when this is going to end.
Yeah, kind of follow up to that. So on the map that you showed showing the percentage that evacuated or stayed, there was the big east-west split. Was that down just to community knowledge sharing? Was that because of education? Do you know what explains why the West had a lower evacuation rate than the East?
I think that is just a common knowledge across the community, because when you look at even, it's just because I didn't present it, look at the differences between people who experienced the eruption in 2002 and those who didn't. They have at least the same perception and the same knowledge. It's just because when you are living in Goma, you have the permanent visual contact with the volcano, and as I said, it is an open volcano, so the red glow is there every time. So people really, they are aware of the risk that they are facing.
Great. Thank you for very interesting presentations. So two quick questions for both Blaise and Professor Donovan. So, of course, one of the points that has come across is, the different worldviews in terms of how we understand risk. But from your work, have you found that these different worldviews are more similar, or are they dissimilar in terms of risk perception, even though there might be different worldviews. And the second question is about resilience. And if one thinks about resilience, like a lay person like me, who's not very well versed, for example, the topic of volcanology, I think of resilience as kind of building or mitigating kind of risk, kind of which is more external to how people perceive, the people perceiving or experiencing kind of being exposed to the hazard. So when you shared, Blaise, for example, that people who had experienced the kind of eruptions before were more reluctant to leave or to evacuate, that was quite interesting, because one could think of that as a kind of resilience, but more from continuous exposure to the risk rather than having kind of mitigated that kind of risk. So I'd be kind of more interested to hear a little bit more about maybe how we could rethink, or how maybe for lay people like myself could kind of expand their thinking about resilience.
So maybe, yeah.
Okay. You want me to go at the front, do you? You want me to go up here? Okay. Okay. On the sort of the risk perception in different cultures and things like that, I think one of the things is that even if you don't have risk necessarily as a thing that you really think about, trust in the government, trust in the people who are asking you to evacuate is really, really important. And I did have a slide that I took out that shows the sort of difference that different groups, different levels of trust in different groups in lots of places where I've done surveys, risk perception surveys essentially, but looking at trust particularly and trying to model trust. And the kinds of challenges that you then reach with groups that are really, really marginalised. And one of the things we're trying to do in Imagine is to engage with those groups, the ones that are really marginalised and don't trust the government, because they are the ones that really struggle in eruptions. And sometimes when there's a history, it's even worse, because if that history is bad, then they're less likely to behave. So there are volcanoes. I mean, even like around Lonquimay, people got into, in the 80s when it erupted, their livestock got into difficulties. Further north, Copahue, where one of my PhD students, or former PhD student Carolyn Smith, is working, the community were evacuated, and they lost some of their livestock, and that caused a huge breakdown of trust. So there's a lot of kind of challenges around getting these people to trust you. And so that's why one of the things to really focus on when looking at these different worldviews is how you build trust across different worldviews, because that's a really big challenge, I think. And resilience looks different in lots of different contexts, I think, as well. Some of these communities are extremely resilient in spite of not believing necessarily in risk. I would say some of the Montserratians, for example, are extremely resilient because they've stayed on the island and learned to live with the volcano. People learn to live with volcanoes. And sometimes they're not wrong necessarily. They're just in disagreement with what they're being told they should do. So it's a complicated landscape, I think, around sort of how you measure, think about, define resilience as well. Whether it's individual resilience or societal resilience, there's huge literatures around this, and around also the way that resilience can be imposed on people. And people can be told, you must be more resilient, and that then takes the responsibility off the government. So there's quite a lot of interesting nuances around resilience, I think.
I think that the responses from Professor Donovan is really what I wanted also to mention. But just to stress something about resilience. For example, in my case, we have a lot of I can call it even propaganda from NGOs. I'm not really against NGOs, but they are having a lot of money to work in my country. So we have more than 50 international NGOs and several local NGOs and all the UN agencies that they are in my country. But because they want to justify what they have like budget, you are seeing all of the reports that they are putting on internet and their Facebook, their website, they are mentioning that they try to improve the resilience of the people and so on. But when you really try to talk to these people, evaluate what they have like resilience, they are trying just to survive. So is why we are trying to really to evaluate exactly this capacity of this population and to let people be aware that what we are maybe saying that is resilience is just because people, they don't have choice. And maybe they could, if they had other opportunity and another place where to live, they could try maybe to leave that place and go to live to another cities, just because around the city of Goma we're still having a lot of challenge in terms of security, but also even facilities. So it's, yeah, can say resilience, but really is not in resilience in a good way. Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions?
This is more for Blaise, really, but I was wondering if you come across any of that sort of classic tension between physical science and social science, because I work across both and I encounter it quite a lot, where there's sort of a perception among some physical scientists that social science is perhaps a little bit weaker, which can be quite frustrating when you're trying to integrate both. And I was wondering if you come across that and if you had any ways to sort of overcome that.
Yeah, first of all, so I have a background in geology, so when I started this research, I had really big challenge to understand this social aspect. But this is, I can say, what is really interesting to do an interdisciplinary research. Yeah, but I think even the physical sciences can inform the social sciences, and even the social sciences can inform the physical sciences. So we need maybe to have more talk together and to try to work together so that we can understand. Because, yeah, you know, I have, for example, a colleague from the observatory who is trying to make an automated analysis of earthquake signal so that they can try to better monitor the volcano. And one time we had a discussion and I said, okay, even though you can have a monitoring system that can alert 2 days before an eruption, but if we can have people decided to not evacuate, is it really something that is efficient or just for publication, so you are becoming maybe a professor and so on? So in terms of disaster risk management, is really an interdisciplinary area of research, and both we need to work together.
Well, actually, Jack, as I'm holding the mic, I'm going to take this opportunity. Look, I'm done.
I've got a question, sorry. For Blaise. Quite specific, but so what was quite striking from your preliminary risk perception surveys was that most people have a perception of risk. But what was even kind of more striking was, even though there'd been events quite in recent living memory, there were some people who still didn't have like a perception of risk, if I've interpreted that right. I just wondered, from what you saw, was there a certain demographic whereby they still didn't have that perception of risk, even though there was recent events?
You mean if there were, for example, differences in terms of demographic aspect of the population?
Like what sort of characters, for those few, that minority that didn't have a perception of risk or didn't think there was a risk, was there like a pattern that you saw, or like an age group, a specific age group?
If I remember very well, there were also differences in terms of the way people they were perceiving the risk. So in terms like the rich people living in the city center. They were considering, for example, they had a low level of risk perception, is just because they were thinking that maybe the resources that they have, they can help them to manage the risk. But also they were living just, the city center is located near the border. So for them it was very easy, for example, to evacuate. Even during the evacuation, they were just there waiting to see how the situation going to evaluate so that they can decide. So yeah, there were really a difference between wealthy people and this poor community, and is where they were, for example, say they have a high level of risk perception. And also another difference was between men and women is just because what we had from the community, even during the evacuation, is that in the household is women who had the responsibility, for example, to care and to look after the kids and so on. So for them, men, they are just there to look for money to support the family and so on. Even during the evacuation, it was most women and children that evacuated. So women, they had a high level of risk perception compared to men. So this is some of the differences between people that we had. Yeah.
Great, thank you. So I think, is that anyone else got any questions?
Yeah, I'm going to take the microphone liberty. I guess I want you both to kind of talk a little bit about, you both work in the community level, and I guess I want you guys to talk a little bit about the impacts that this type of research has on you, and perhaps some of the kind of visceral impacts of working at that kind of level.
Yeah, especially, for example, for me, you are doing a research in a city where you are living, and then you have also you are like researching on the decision of the population, and while you need also to make a decision about the risk that your family is facing. So, for example, the experience that I had last few months ago when I was collecting the data from the project that we are working together with Lara, with the support of Cambridge Africa, is that 2 days after when we launched the survey, I got from my enumerator, they were like suffering of the emotional impact of the people that they were surveying. And then they told me, like, you pay them, and then the money they are using it, like, for example, to support and to give these people that they are serving. And then what I did, it was like every evening when they are coming back, to have a discussion with them so that we can try to talk and to help them, for example, to be really focused on what they are doing as job, because in that situation, even the records that they are doing, they can maybe even trying to exaggerate compared to what they are getting from this community. So yeah, doing a research, especially in a context like Goma, it can impact even the researcher, but yeah, what can we do?
I haven't had that level of intensity of experience, but I have cried quite a lot with people when they're, if they're experiencing something, and you have to also be very conscious of the sort of ethics of when you're interviewing somebody and they're upset, and you give them information about what they, sources of support or whatever it is. But so sometimes that has been hard to deal with, and then you feel guilty as well because you're bringing it back up for them, however much they may have known that that would happen, it's still a difficult thing to ask somebody to do. I think it can have quite a significant impact, and you have to be aware of that and know where you can get support when you need it. I think it also acts as a motivator for trying to do things that are vaguely useful in some way. And it's a privilege as well to share those things. So I still get tearful sometimes reading out quotes and stuff, because people have shared with you something quite precious. So I do think it's a privilege that shouldn't be overlooked either.